What if the person you loved most faked your death to steal everything from you? This is the unbelievable story of a wife who died twice and survived to tell the tale of utmost betrayal. The night in Maplewood Estates was different from any other. A heavy storm had been brewing for hours, and the howling winds sent ripples through the trees, shaking the windows of the small homes scattered along Briarstone Road. Inside, the quiet hum of the neighborhood seemed to fade away, replaced by the roar of thunder and the incessant pitter-patter of rain against rooftops. For many, it was just another stormy night to endure. But for Evelyn Adeyemi, it would be a night that would change everything. Evelyn, a 34-year-old Nigerian-American woman, had been a part of the Maplewood community for years. As a midwife, she was known for her calm demeanor and the gentle way she cared for every expecting mother. She wasn't just a professional, she was family to everyone who knew her. She had that rare gift of making others feel at ease, no matter how chaotic the situation. Tonight, however, there was a strange unease in the air. Evelyn had been scheduled to assist with a delivery at the local birthing center. It was supposed to be a straightforward night, help a mother bring a new life into the world and return home. But hours passed, and Evelyn never arrived. That in itself was unusual. She was always punctual, reliable, and dedicated to her work. Her absence was starting to feel more like a bad omen. Daniel Cooper, Evelyn's husband, sat in the living room of their one-story home. A former Marine turned construction foreman, Daniel was a man of few words, often quiet and reserved. Yet tonight, his usual calm seemed to be slipping away. He kept glancing at the clock, then at the door, his nerves stretched taut. Evelyn had always been the steady one, the heart of their home. If she wasn't home yet, something was wrong. Tarek, their 8-year-old son, sat on the floor playing with his toys, unaware of the growing tension. His innocence and laughter were a stark contrast to the storm outside, which was becoming more violent by the minute. Daniel couldn't ignore it anymore. He grabbed his phone and dialed Evelyn's number once again. It rang, and then the voicemail picked up. His stomach sank. He stood up, pacing in circles. Something wasn't right. Evelyn never missed a call. She never ignored him. The rain outside intensified, and the wind whipped through the trees, causing the leaves to rustle ominously. Daniel's mind raced with possible scenarios. Maybe the roads were too slick for Evelyn to drive home. Maybe there was a delay at the birthing center. But that didn't explain why she hadn't answered her phone. A cold sweat trickled down his back. Panic was starting to claw at him. He dialed the birthing center, but there was no answer. By the time the clock struck midnight, his anxiety had reached its peak. Something was wrong, and Daniel knew it. He couldn't sit around and wait for answers. He needed to act. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 1 a.m. now. The storm outside was making the roads impassable, and a wave of unease washed over him. What if something had happened to her? What if her car had broken down, or worse, she had gotten into an accident? He grabbed his phone and dialed the birthing center where Evelyn worked. The phone rang several times before a tired-sounding nurse picked up. "Birthing center, how may I help you?" she answered. "Hi, this is Daniel Cooper. I'm calling about my wife, Evelyn. She was supposed to be home by now, but I can't reach her. Could you check if she's still at work?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but the worry in it was evident. The nurse checked her schedule. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper, but it looks like she's not here. She left hours ago. We didn't hear from her after her shift ended." Daniel's heart sank. She wasn't at work, and now she was nowhere to be found. His thoughts raced and panic began to set in. He tried her phone again, but this time it went straight to voicemail again. A sense of dread began to envelop him. He couldn't wait any longer. His fingers trembled as he dialed the police. His voice, though steady, was tight with fear. "Hello, this is Daniel Cooper. My wife, Evelyn, has been missing since she left work hours ago. I can't reach her, and I'm really worried. Can you please send someone to check on her?" The dispatcher's voice was calm and assuring, but every second felt like an eternity. "We'll send officers right away, sir. Please stay where you are." It felt like hours before the officers arrived. By then, the rain had begun to flood the driveway, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. Daniel met the officers at the door, his face pale and filled with anxiety. "Mr. Cooper," one of the officers said gently, "we're going to need to check on your wife. Can you tell us exactly when she left for work?" "She left this morning for her shift, and she was supposed to come home hours ago," Daniel explained, his hands still shaking. "I've called her several times, but I haven't heard anything. I'm afraid something's happened." The officers nodded and exchanged a glance, then stepped inside the house. The tension in the air was thick as they walked through the quiet, dimly lit living room. The only sound was the pounding of rain on the roof and the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the room. They checked every room of the house, starting with the living room. Daniel had been sitting there, waiting and worrying, but there was no sign of Evelyn. No sign of a struggle. No sign of anything unusual. That's when they noticed it. The door to the hallway was ajar, and the dim light of a flickering lamp spilled into the living room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Something about this house felt wrong. It was too quiet. They moved cautiously toward the hallway almost at the back of the house, and then they saw it. Evelyn's body, lying lifeless on the floor, her eyes wide open, staring into nothing. She was cold, her skin pale, but there were no visible injuries, no wounds, no signs of a struggle. The sight struck the officers hard, and one of them quickly stepped back, his hand hovering over his radio, unsure of how to proceed. Daniel followed them there and saw his wife's body on the floor there. He collapsed to the floor beside her, cradling her body, his grief raw and uncontained. "Evelyn, no!" he whispered through his tears, his voice barely audible. He rocked back and forth as if trying to wake her, his face a mask of shock and sorrow. The officers stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. They knew they had to call for the coroner, but something didn't feel right. Evelyn's body looked almost too peaceful, too still. It was as though she had just fallen asleep and never woke up. "Sir," one of the officers said gently, trying to break through Daniel's despair, "we need to ask you a few questions. Are you sure your wife was in good health? No heart problems, no medical issues?" Daniel's eyes darted to the officer, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something strange in his gaze. But he quickly nodded, his voice shaky. "Yes, she was healthy. She had a full health screening just this month. She was fine. This doesn't make sense." The officer didn't respond immediately, but something was nagging at him. It was clear that Daniel's grief was genuine, but there was an undercurrent of suspicion that couldn't be ignored. As the officers made their way through the house, they began to feel a growing unease. The scene didn't add up. Evelyn had been healthy, had no history of heart problems. But here she was, dead on the floor, with no explanation. And where was Tariq, her son? Daniel had claimed he was with the neighbors, but the officers hadn't seen him. There was no sign of him anywhere in the house, no note left behind. This only deepened the mystery. The coroner arrived, and the initial examination was quick. Evelyn had died from sudden cardiac arrest. A diagnosis that seemed to make sense, but it didn't sit right with the officers. Evelyn had been healthy, vibrant. How could this happen so suddenly, with no warning? After the coroner arrived and conducted a brief examination, he quickly declared the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest. It was a diagnosis that seemed plausible, but it didn't sit well with Evelyn's family, especially with her sister Amy, who was flying in from Nigeria after hearing the devastating news. Amy knew that Evelyn was healthy. There were no heart problems. She had just passed a full health screening only weeks before. As the funeral preparations began, Amy's suspicions grew. Evelyn had been a strong, vibrant woman. She wasn't someone who could just collapse and die without warning. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to be missing. The funeral was held at Hillview Cemetery on a cold, overcast morning. Daniel stood quietly in the back, his face a mask of grief, but there was something about his demeanor that seemed distant. His lack of visible emotion felt odd, out of place. After the service, he left Georgia the very next day, claiming that he was moving to Texas to start fresh. The timing of it all seemed too convenient. As the family said their final goodbyes to Evelyn, no one knew that the shocking truth was about to be revealed. Daniel's life and his dark secrets were about to catch up with him in the most unexpected way. It had been 2 days since Evelyn's funeral. The house felt empty, like a shell of its former self. Daniel had left Georgia so suddenly, saying he was moving to Texas. No one questioned it at the time. His grief seemed genuine, but there was something unsettling about the speed with which he had packed up and left. Amy, Evelyn's younger sister, had barely had time to grieve. She was still in shock, still trying to piece together the events of the past few days. The funeral was quiet, too quiet. The entire community was still reeling from the loss of Evelyn, but Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her sister had always been the pillar of strength. She had no history of heart issues. This wasn't natural. Amy stayed behind in Georgia, hoping to find answers, hoping to make sense of the silence that hung over the house. She spent the first few days sifting through Evelyn's personal things. There was something comforting about being surrounded by her sister's belongings, as if she could still feel Evelyn's presence in the room. But as she rifled through Evelyn's desk drawers, she stumbled upon something that stopped her in her tracks. It was a small, worn envelope tucked away in the back of the drawer. It was marked personal. Inside, Amy found a letter from Evelyn to Daniel, written just weeks before her death. The letter was simple but poignant. Evelyn had written about a hidden inheritance her father had left for her, a sum of $160,000, stored in a bank in Nigeria. Evelyn had never touched the money, not even once. She had kept it a secret, except for this letter. Amy's hands trembled as she read the letter. It didn't make sense. Why would Evelyn keep something so important a secret from Daniel? The more she thought about it, the more questions flooded her mind. Had Daniel known about this inheritance? And if so, was that the real reason he had been so eager to get rid of Evelyn? The letter was the first real clue Amy had that maybe Evelyn's death wasn't as simple as the coroner's report had suggested. She couldn't shake the feeling that her sister had been murdered for the money, but she needed proof. And she wasn't about to stop until she got it. Weeks passed. Daniel had been unreachable. He had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a note saying he was moving to Texas to start fresh. But Amy wasn't convinced. He had been far too eager to leave, as if he was running from something. Evelyn's death still didn't make sense. Then, in late October, everything changed. A call came in from the police in Baytown, Texas. A woman had been found collapsed in a supermarket, and her identification said she was Maria Coates. But when her fingerprints were checked, the result was shocking. It was Evelyn. She was alive. The news hit Amy like a thunderclap. How could it be? Evelyn had been dead, buried just months ago. The woman in Baytown, bruised and underweight, was Evelyn. The police had confirmed it. But how? How had she survived? Amy wasted no time. She packed her bags and flew to Texas to meet the police and try to make sense of what had happened. The police were baffled. They couldn't explain how Evelyn had ended up in Texas. She was weak, bruised, and disoriented, but she was alive. When Amy met Evelyn in the hospital, it was like a dream. Evelyn's eyes were filled with confusion, and she didn't remember much of the time she had been missing. She knew her name, knew her family, but the details were foggy. She spoke about being locked in a basement for months, kept in isolation and drugged. As Evelyn's memory slowly returned, she revealed the horrifying truth. Daniel had known about the inheritance and wanted the money. He had hired a mortician's assistant, Raymond Lott, to help him stage her death. They had used a cadaver that resembled her, altered it, and passed it off as Evelyn's body. Then, they transported her to Texas, where she was locked away and sedated for months. Evelyn had been a prisoner in her own life. Daniel had done this to her, all for the money. And then, when she had the chance, Evelyn had escaped. The discovery shattered Amy. She couldn't believe that Daniel, the man who had been her sister's husband for years, could be capable of something so evil. She felt a deep sense of betrayal, and at the same time, relief that Evelyn was alive. But now there was one question that remained. Where was Tarek? Daniel's arrest came quickly. The police tracked him down to a motel in Fort Worth, where he had been hiding under a false identity. They found fake passports, documents about his plan to disappear with the money, and even Evelyn's wedding ring. But there was still no sign of Tarek. Daniel refused to speak, but Evelyn remembered something, a cabin Daniel had told her about years ago. It was a secluded property near the Okefenokee Swamp, a place where they used to go camping. The police searched the cabin, and after several days, they found Tarek alive and scared. He had been kept isolated, told that his mother had gone to heaven, and that bad people were trying to hurt him. It was the darkest form of manipulation. Daniel was arrested and charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison, and Raymond Lott was given 25 years for his role in the cover-up. Evelyn, now a free woman, moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, with Tarek. She changed her name and began a new life, leaving behind the past that had tried to destroy her. Tarek, now a young man, graduated from college, and the bond between him and his mother only grew stronger. Their story became one of survival, of strength in the face of betrayal and horror. And as for Daniel, his name would forever be associated with the cruelest act of deception. His wife had died twice, but the second time, she fought her way back. Days turned into weeks, and for Evelyn and Tarek, the world seemed to move slowly, as if time itself had been stretched thin by the trauma they had endured. Evelyn was still adjusting to the reality that she was free, that the nightmare was over, but the scars left behind, both physical and emotional, would take much longer to heal. Every quiet moment in her new home in Charlotte felt surreal. She had come so close to death, and yet, here she was, breathing, living, holding her son in her arms once more. Tarek had questions, as any child would, but his mother had no answers. He didn't understand why his father had done what he had done, or why he had been kept in isolation for so long. All he knew was that his life had changed forever. He would never again see his father as a protector. The man who had once been a hero in his eyes was now a villain. Evelyn didn't know how to explain it to him, how to make sense of the twisted web Daniel had woven. She hadn't been able to save him, but now she had to save herself and her son. She had to make sure that they moved on, that they rebuilt their lives from the wreckage of what had once been a family. There were days when Evelyn would sit in the quiet of her living room, staring at the walls, lost in thought. She thought about everything: her marriage to Daniel, the love they had shared, the betrayal, the lies, and the pain. She thought about her father's inheritance, the money that had been the catalyst for all of this destruction. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty. What kind of man would do that to his own wife and son? What kind of man would risk everything for money, even his own family's well-being? Evelyn didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain: she would never forgive Daniel. Not for what he did to her, and not for what he did to Tarek. The phone rang one evening, interrupting her thoughts. It was a call from the police. "Evelyn," the officer said on the other end, "we need to talk to you about Daniel." Her heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down her spine. She had been expecting this. She had known it was only a matter of time before the police would reach out again. Daniel had been arrested and charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and fraud. But now it seemed there was more to the story. "Is he?" she began, her voice trembling, unable to finish the sentence. "No," the officer replied gently. "He's in custody, but we've discovered something. It seems Daniel has been involved in a much bigger operation. There are connections to criminal activity that we didn't know about before." Evelyn's stomach dropped. She had known Daniel had been hiding something, but this was far beyond anything she had imagined. It didn't take long for the investigation to uncover the full extent of Daniel's involvement in a series of illegal schemes. It turned out that Daniel had been using fake identities, laundering money through various shell companies, and working with a network of criminals who had helped him stage Evelyn's death. The fake passports found in his motel room were just the tip of the iceberg. He had been planning to disappear, not just with the inheritance money, but with other assets he had siphoned off over the years. His manipulation had gone much deeper than Evelyn had ever realized. Amy, who had been staying in touch with the police, was horrified by the details. The man she had once trusted, the man who had been her sister's husband, had been living a double life for years. His charm had been a facade, hiding the darkness that lay beneath. Evelyn couldn't fathom it. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had been leading a life of deceit and manipulation. All for money, all for power. The news was hard to digest, but in some ways it provided closure. She had been so focused on surviving that she hadn't fully understood the scope of Daniel's treachery. Now she knew the truth, and the truth was more chilling than anything she had ever imagined. But even with the truth revealed, Evelyn knew that her journey was far from over. She and Tarek would never go back to the lives they had once known. They couldn't. They had to start fresh, start over. But it wasn't just about the house, the possessions, or even the money. It was about rebuilding their trust in the world. It was about finding the strength to move forward, no matter how dark the past had been. Evelyn took each day as it came. She worked hard to give Tarek the life he deserved, away from the shadows of his father's actions. She found a small job as a nurse, working with mothers and babies in a local clinic. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling. She had a purpose again. Tarek, too, began to heal. He found solace in his studies and the new friends he made at school. He spoke openly about the trauma he had endured, the confusion and fear that had haunted him for so long. His mother's resilience became his guiding light. Evelyn never spoke to Daniel again after the arrest. There were no letters, no visits. He was behind bars, and she had no interest in revisiting the past with him. His punishment was not just the life sentence he would serve. It was the fact that he would never again be a part of their lives. Years later, as Tarek stood at the podium at his college graduation, Evelyn sat in the front row, a proud smile on her face. The darkness of the past was now a distant memory, something that could never touch their future. Tarek had become the young man she always knew he could be, strong, intelligent, and full of promise. As she watched her son speak, her heart swelled with pride. They had made it. They had survived. And the story of Evelyn, the woman who had died twice, was now just that, a story. A story of betrayal, survival, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The storm had passed, and they were finally free. Thank you for watching till end. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. What do you think about Evelyn visiting Daniel in prison? Do you think she should? Type your thought in the comments section below, and I'll see you in the next video.